I am grateful that so many Delawareans have come and joined us here today to hear a terrific keynote speaker. And I am grateful for your hard work and collaboration earlier today in this third Opportunity Africa Conference. It's been incredibly informative and helpful, and a day that will act as a foundation for more important work ahead together. And I hope that all of you are leaving this morning's sessions as inspired by the action and partnership that you've seen and experienced here as I am. It is now my great honor to introduce someone who's inspired me throughout his public service career. His drive to help others, to lift others up, to solve big problems in the service of others, his absolute dedication to making this a better country and a better world have challenged and inspired me since my first days in public service, as I know is the case of so many others who've come here to hear him today. President Clinton's mastery of policy and his deep empathy and understanding for the challenges that working people face every day here at home in the United States and around the world is a remarkable and a rare combination. Of course, he's here with us today not just because of those personal qualities, but because of the incredible impact he has made and continues to make around the globe and especially on the continent of Africa. We have had a remarkable Opportunity Africa Conference here this morning, and we've heard from all sorts of voices from many different backgrounds. I'm grateful that we've had leading national nonprofits, one, WWF, National Geographic, American Jewish World Service represented. We've had voices from the African diaspora, Osagi Imasogi, and a Namibian who has traveled to share an African voice with us, John Kasaona, who spoke about wildlife trafficking. We've had a panel on how to do business in Africa that included representatives from our hometown company DuPont and GE to Denton's and the Corporate Council on Africa. And we are thrilled that there are 20 students here with Delaware State University from Gimsa from Ghana who are joining us here today from Ghana. We have academic leaders from Delaware State University and from the University of Delaware and all across our federal government. We've been blessed to have representatives today from the Small Business Administration, from OPIC, from EXIM, from USAID, and from the Departments of State and of Commerce. This has been a great opportunity to reflect on the challenges and the opportunities for the state of Delaware and for the continent of Africa. And I cannot think of a better concluding speaker for today's conference than President Clinton. As president, he left many lasting legacies, but one in particular has been critical to harnessing America's capacity to effect positive change in Africa. That's the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which established mutually beneficial trade relationships between the U.S. and the majority of countries across sub-Saharan Africa. Since AGOA's passage, African exports to the U.S. have grown more than 500% to more than $53 billion. And while 34 countries in sub-Saharan Africa were eligible when it was first passed, today that number stands at 40. 14 years since President Clinton signed it into law, AGOA remains in many ways the most significant piece of legislation passed that focuses specifically on the continent, and I'm pleased and proud to be working with Republican colleagues in the Senate on its reauthorization and extension. As we all know, the 8 years in the White House were only the beginning of his work for our nation and for Africa. Through the Bill and Hillary and Chelsea Clinton Foundation, President Clinton has been a driving force for effective partnerships and innovation in Africa. For over a decade, the Foundation's Global Health Initiative has extended access to life-saving HIV/AIDS treatments to more than 6 million Africans in low and middle-income countries. His Trees of Hope initiative has helped reverse deforestation in Malawi by helping small farmers to plant trees and build sustainable businesses by selling both fruits off the trees and carbon credits off those trees. In Rwanda, President Clinton is helping develop locally operated agribusiness to create jobs and help farmers build sustainable livelihoods. And of course, the Clinton Global Initiative has been at the heart of innovative change around the world. It has brought together in a conference like this, but significantly grander in scale than this, global leaders in business and academia and government, the nonprofit sector, all towards the goal of tackling and solving humanity's greatest challenges. President Clinton's approach to policy leadership and his approach to Africa truly summarizes what we've talked about here today. He's shown that policy that's innovative, that's rooted in our values, and that's built on partnerships has the power to improve and to save lives. He is truly a shining example of what it means to serve others with rigor and unyielding dedication, and I'm honored he's with us here today. So, please join me in a round of applause as we welcome to Opportunity Africa's third year our keynote speaker, the 47th President of these United States, our President, William Jefferson Clinton.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator Coons, Congressman Carney, Mayor Williams. Thanks for bringing me back to Delaware, Senator. I like it here. The first time I came here when I was running for president, I felt right at home. And the guy says, "Why do you feel so at home?" I said, "It's just like Arkansas. You got more chickens than people." It's small enough where people know each other, where they can have differences in an argument and still actually come to a conclusion, which is quite important. I admire Senator Coons for many reasons, but this is one of the most important. The fact that you're here for the third year in a row to meet and talk about Africa, and the fact that you're here across every sector of society and the economy of this remarkable state, and the fact that you understand that Delaware and Africa are quite interdependent. In coming here, you will also learn more and more about a remarkable continent that has dozens of countries. I always go crazy when I hear people talk about Africa as if it were a coherent place. It's a highly complex, endlessly fascinating, occasionally maddening collection of countries struggling as we are here in America toward a very new future. I would like to begin, in effect, with the end. My belief is that we live in an interdependent world that is full of possibilities. That's basically what got all of you in those chairs today. That the world we live in, however, is being severely constrained by too much inequality in access to education, health care, employment, training, capital. That it is being constrained by too much insecurity in terms of vulnerability to terror, to internal armed conflicts, as we see throughout the African continent, through dramatic swings in the economy that can be triggered almost instantaneously because of movements of money, as we saw most dramatically in America in the financial crisis in September of 2008, which started here and quickly engulfed the United Kingdom, Ireland, Iceland, and within 2 weeks it caused the layoff of 35 million factory workers in China. And finally, it's not sustainable because of the way we produce and consume energy and other local resources. So we have to find a way to accommodate 7 billion people on planet Earth, more to come by 2050, and do it with ever more efficient use of local resources and of greenhouse gas producing energy and other basis of that. So I spend my whole life trying to figure out how can I accelerate the positive and reduce the negative forces of global interdependence. If you ask me a question about where I stand on anything, I have this sort of automatic filter in my head. And I ask myself, will this reduce inequality, instability, unsustainability? Will it create a future of shared prosperity and shared responsibilities and a genuine sense of membership in a larger community? If the answer is yes, I'm for it. If it's no, I'm against it. And it has become the driving obsession of the work I do now and the work our family and our foundation does around the world. If your goal is to build a world of shared prosperity and shared responsibilities, a sense of shared community in the sense that our differences matter, they make life more interesting. I mean, look at this crowd today. We're in Delaware. What would this crowd have looked like 30 years ago? Too many people would have looked like me, old gray-haired white guys in suits. Looking in the crowd, I am delighted that my demographic has not been entirely eliminated. And I thank you for that. But really, it's exciting. Look, we got all these students here. There are a lot more women here. There are people of different racial and ethnic backgrounds and religious backgrounds. This is a microcosm of the world here. And I think that what clearly works best everywhere are networks of creative cooperation where people get together across lines that they often haven't crossed in the past and figure out how to do things faster, better, at lower costs. And that's essentially the mission of my foundation. I could tell all the young people who work for me, if anybody asks you what we do, tell them we're in the how business. We try to figure out how to do things faster, better, at lower cost. And the best way is always with an inclusive, cooperative network. After the earthquake in Haiti, which is basically peopled by Africans brought there as slaves to what was then the richest island on earth, and it's still the only place on earth where a republic was established through a slave revolt. But when I came there, I was working for the United Nations. Then I got the Clinton Global Initiative involved. I finished my UN tour, and we stayed with a group of people from all over the world who just cared about Haiti. And they've already put in just this one little group I got about $400 million in new investments to create jobs and solve other challenges for the country. That's what works. It works better than constant conflict. Any place you see that is being dominated by a conflict model is not doing very well. Any place that is dominated by people who have vigorous, vibrant, sometimes screaming debates, but if they end in an effort at creative cooperation, they're doing pretty well. And that is, in a way, the dilemma that is playing itself out in the decisions that are being made in Washington, D.C., but also in the streets in Ukraine, the conflict in Turkey, the conflict in Syria, the continuous alienation and reconciliation in Iraq between the Sunni and the Shia, all over the world, wherever people are practicing the politics of inclusion and cooperation and networking, where nobody acts like they have all the answers or should make all the decisions, good things are happening. So with that, let me just try to talk a little about Africa, what I think the challenges are and what I think the opportunities are for all of us. Senator Coon pointed out that when I was president, we passed the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, and it had an enormous impact, positive impact on Africans that went beyond economics. Shortly after I left office, I was in Ghana. And it was an interesting thing because the biggest crowd I ever spoke to was on a 12-day trip I took to Africa in 1998. I went to 7 countries. And in the square in Accra, Ghana, there were 700,000 people. And then they ran microphones, or speakers, excuse me, back on all the streets that radiated into the square. So there were more than 1 million people there. And I went back. And when you're not in office, there are not 1 million people there. But, but anyway, we went to this place outside town that had once been an old barn that was a market for selling kente cloth and other things that the Ghanaians make. And there were about 50 people in there when I walked in, and 5 minutes later there were 500 people, and 5 minutes after that there were 2,000 people, and the Secret Service was scared to death. And I said, you need to relax. I'm safer here than I would be in my own bed. These people are my friends. Just relax. So anyway, we'd completed the trip, and I was back at the airport on the way to get in my plane to go to the next stop. And this woman starts screaming at me, don't go, don't go. And she's waving something. So I stopped, and this lady comes up to me and she said, because of the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, I am one of 400 women working in a shirt factory. We have jobs for the first time, and all of our children are in school. So here, what? So she said, so here's your shirt. And I said, oh, heck, I'm not in office anymore. I'll take the graft. I took the shirt. And I took that shirt home, and I put it in my closet in this little town in New York where Hillary and I live now. I look at that shirt every day. I put it at eye level on this shelf, and I look at it every day to remind me that that woman and everybody she represents are not mad at the United States, don't want to go to war, would like to share the future. Now, she's not naive. She knows she's never going to be as well off as I am, but she thinks she's better off, and she thinks her child has a better future because we join together in common cause. And that's very important to remember right now about people who feel desperate, not only in Africa, but in the United States. People need something to look forward to when they get up in the morning. And so the first thing I want to say to all of you is, you have to do what I made up my mind to do when I left the White House. Decide what you care about and do it, and don't fail to do it because you can't do everything. You can do something, and we can all do something. And the great thing about the modern world is that average people have more power than ever before. It can be a curse. One of the most interesting books I've read in the last couple of years is by Moses Naim, who is sort of an adopted American Israeli who called The End of Power. It's not really about the end of power. What it's really about is the dispersal of power, about the power we all have because of the social media, because of technology, because of our ability to mobilize. The good news is, when the earthquake struck Haiti, the American people gave $1 billion. Median contribution, $26. Why? It was the first texting disaster where people could text a number and send $10 to the Red Cross, to the Clinton Bush Haiti Fund, or you name it. Which means that if lots of people band together, they have staggering power. The other thing that's happened in the last 20 years that is one of the great good news trends of the 21st century, almost never written about, is the rise of non-governmental organizations. There are now, in the United States, more than 1 million NGOs. More than half of them formed since 1995, in the last 2 decades. And basically, they do in part what such organizations have always done. The first NGO in America was the Volunteer Fire Department, organized by Benjamin Franklin in Philadelphia before the Constitution was written. And it was a classic case for an NGO. The government didn't have a tax base to provide a fire department, and there was no money in it. You couldn't make a business out of it because the house was most likely burned down by the time you got there. So volunteers did it to save what they could. And that's still what the United Way does. You step into the gap between what the private sector can produce and the government can provide here and around the world. But increasingly, NGOs work with the private sector and with government to do things faster, cheaper, better, because we don't have to turn a profit every quarter, unlike a business, and we don't have to be ashamed to admit that we tried something and we failed, which politicians are reluctant to do for understandable reasons. I hope we'll get over that, by the way. As citizens, we should want our politicians to try things to solve problems and admit they don't work. I tried that, that didn't work, I'm going to do something else. But, so, that's the background that I want you to think about in terms of where we go with Africa. There is a surprising amount of bipartisan interest in Africa. There are, I see you nodding your head, Senator, that AGOA was a bipartisan effort. We had Republican support for AGOA. One of the strongest supporters we had was the former senator from Indiana, Richard Lugar, who for many years was the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He got that we needed to build long-term partnerships with Africa and that you could never expect a lot of these countries to emerge from a long legacy of poverty through aid alone, that we had to have trade, we had to have investment, we needed a broad-based strategy. We still do. The thing that I try to do now is just to bring as many partners as I can into Africa. I started there working in healthcare because when I left office, there was no Global Fund on AIDS, TB, and Malaria. There was no PEPFAR program, the program President Bush started, and I think his most important achievement. And there were only 200,000 people in the world outside wealthy countries getting AIDS medicine to stay alive, and 130,000 of them were in Brazil, where they had their own pharmaceutical industry and an absolutely brilliant distribution network going way up into the rainforest, involving the government, the Catholic Church, NGOs, and the native tribes. It was amazing. Still is. So, Nelson Mandela and I started going around trying to just rattle a tin cup and raise money. The governments of Ireland and Canada were the first ones who said to me, I didn't ask them for any money, I said, I want you to commit $20 million a year for the next 5 years. And just promise me you won't spend the money till I green light it. But I don't want any of it. I just want to see if I can reorganize the AIDS market for medicine. So we went to our major Indian suppliers and the big one in South Africa, and we said, we want you to change your business model. AIDS medicine was then being sold at $500 a person a year, much less than the $10,000 we pay in America, but still too much in a country with a per capita income of under $1 a day, with a much higher infection rate. I asked them, and I said, you know, if you think about it, you're running the whole AIDS, this is a global epidemic of staggering proportions, and you're providing medicine as if you were running a small town grocery store or a jewelry store. And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, think about a jewelry store. You have to keep a lot of inventory, and you have to have a huge markup because you're not going to sell that many things. And then you may not really get paid. Somebody may take the engagement ring back or decide they don't like to watch after all. And if you're in a little town, you can't say, I'm sorry you bought it, goodbye. Then that's a customer you've lost forever, plus whoever else they can talk to. You should run this like a supermarket. Very high volumes, low profit margin per unit, certain payment. And I told them that I'd made this deal with Ireland and Canada. And so we started. And we got the price from $500 down to $150 60 down to 140, down to 120, down to 90. We got the children's drug from $600 down to $60, and we were off to the races. And I told them at the beginning, I said, if you don't make more money doing it this way, I give you my word, I'll tear the contract up. And because I had worked with them, they believed us. And they did. So today we've got about 11 million people on this medicine worldwide now, and 5.8 million of them getting it off contracts we negotiated, including 35 countries in Africa. And interestingly enough, it became both economically and morally untenable for the producers to sell other people medicine at prices way higher than they were giving me. So everybody in the world is within about 10% of our prices now. It is a wonderful thing. And it gave a lot of, and because we let the African countries buy the medicine and help them to manage their flows, and we still work on avoiding stockouts and things like that in other areas, we built the capacity of government. It's the second thing I want to say. It is very important to, whoever works in Africa in whatever way, that you try wherever possible to increase the quality and strength of governance while you're doing whatever else you're doing. And it's easier to do if you're actually providing some benefit, some economic or health or education benefit, because then it's something that people do in the ordinary course of events instead of being told, you don't have very good governance, let's make it better. So we went from there. Then the Gates Foundation gave me some money and said, let's try to do this with malaria, which was a little bit tougher, but we started in Tanzania and we were able to do that. Then Pfizer became our first big pharma partner because they make the only drug in the world to treat tuberculosis in people that also have AIDS that doesn't make you so sick you feel like you're dying. In other words, it's the only drug in the world, if you have both tuberculosis and AIDS, that you can take, manage your tuberculosis, eventually get over it, and go on and get up and go to work every day. And Pfizer, basically, it was a wonderful thing. They gave us a 60% discount, saved a couple of 100,000 lives, and I said, why are you doing this? And they said, Big Pharma's model is to try to control 100% of the inflow to the 15% of the world's people who are richest. That's a dumb model. We need to sell something to the other 85%. This is my opening gambit. Pretty impressive. I've never forgotten it. So then we started working on laboratory equipment and testing, and pretty soon we were out there trying to build healthcare systems so that people wouldn't be going to one place for AIDS, another place for TB, another place for malaria, another place for maternal and child health. We tried to help them build systems. In Ethiopia, a country which when I started had 80 million people, there must be at 88 or so now. It's an interesting country because 60% of the country lives in big cities. If 10 years ago we had magically put all of us on a couple of jumbo planes and flown to Ethiopia, to Addis, and we'd all gotten food poisoning on the plane on the way over there, we would have been just fine. We'd have gotten good health care when we landed, and we'd get well. The health minister of Ethiopia, now the foreign minister, one of the ablest public servants I ever worked with. You would all be very comfortable if he became the Secretary of Health and Human Services in the United States. A really able man. But the rest of Ethiopia lived in more than 60,000 villages of fewer than 1,000 people, and in the entire constellation of those 60,000 villages, there were only 700 health clinics, which meant that huge numbers of Ethiopians were living and dying anonymously, shut off from access to health care. So they said, will you start helping us build clinics that we can afford to run? So we designed them, put the sanitation facilities way off from the examination rooms, put some basic capacity to freeze medicine there and samples and things like that. They said if you get to 3,500, we'll all be within a day's walk of a clinic. So we did that. Now we're slowly moving toward 16,000, which would put everybody within 3 hours walk of a clinic. And when that happens, they'll have a national health system. And so the most important project I've been involved in, I think potentially because I think it's something others can do in healthcare, is a project we're now engaged in with the government of Rwanda, which wishes to be, keep in mind, in 1998, the first time I went to Rwanda, 4 years after the genocide, the per capita income of the country was still less than $300 a year, about $268 a year. Rwanda has asked us to come help them totally train the healthcare workforce so that they can run a healthcare system with no foreign assistance by 2020. I have no earthly idea yet if they can make it, but they think they can. And this is a very formidable undertaking, even though we've been working there for years in agriculture and reforestation and processing and healthcare. So we got 10 medical schools, 6 nursing schools, 3 dental schools, the Yale School of Management, and we've got 3 or 4 more schools to join us now. Hundreds of Americans going to Rwanda to retrain the workforce according to a plan they approve, not ours. All these people are working for 7% overhead. One of the things that I really hope will change in America in the next few years is that we will stop the dictatorship of AID contractors taking 35% or more overhead for contracts in Africa and elsewhere. A lot of people don't know that. It's not right. So, needless to say, I am not very popular with that community right now. And a lot of these are really good people, but they decide what they want to do. They go do it. The government may or may not want it. Get 15% for American operations, another 20% on site. These schools are doing this for 7%. They're, you know, I think we get to go to 8% next year. I'm afraid they're losing money, but they wanted to change the paradigm of how AIDS was delivered. There's never been anything like this done at this scope in the delivery of AIDS. And I suppose I'm doing penance because I loved my AID administrator when I was president. He did a terrific job, but I never had any idea that our overheads were so out of line. It used to be that a lot of other countries did the same thing, but now we are virtually alone in the percentage of overhead we're taking, which means that if we could go from 35% even to 15, you could literally increase by 20% the amount of American foreign assistance all over the world with no more tax dollars. Think about that, those of you who believe in this. So tune in, you'll be able to see how we do it or whether we're doing well. Meanwhile, we've undertaken massive training and public health initiatives in Zambia, Mozambique, lots of other places. But I would say, as we come toward 2015 and the end of the period for the Millennium Development Goals, more progress has been made in healthcare than in any other area. And Bill Gates, who measures everything and has more money to do it than I do, says the same thing. I feel good about where Africa is going on healthcare. When we started on AIDS, just for example, Swaziland and Lesotho, 2 tiny mountain kingdoms engulfed by South Africa, had 2 of the 4 highest infection rates in the world. Swaziland was in denial. Lesotho became the first country in the world to authorize testing of everybody 12 years old or older and ask us to come in. We did it. They did great. They're running their own business now. But now, nobody's more ardent than Swaziland. The South Africans, as we all know, had a very mixed approach, and they were in the bizarre position of having one of the major manufacturers of AIDS medicine in the world and not really using it. In the last couple of years, we renegotiated their own contracts and saved them $950 million. And they put 100% of the money into drugs. One of the things that I'm proudest of in President Obama's legacy that Hillary shared in, because PEPFAR is in the State Department, is that when he took office, President Bush had agreed to let PEPFAR money buy generic AIDS drugs if the countries wanted to, and about 48% of our purchases were generic, and America was paying for the treatment of 1.7 million people. At the end of President Obama's first term, America, with the same amount of money, no more money, was paying for the treatment of 5.1 million people. They tripled the number of people on treatment. And a staggering amount of that was in South Africa, which has had the biggest uptake in treatment we've seen. So there's a lot of progress being made there. I just want to say a couple of things about some other areas. I think that we need to seriously look at in America what we can do to dramatically increase food production in South Africa without throwing the small farmers off the land. That is, basically, there are a lot of countries in the world today with plenty of money who can't feed themselves. Let's just take two, Saudi Arabia and China. The Chinese even tried to lease or buy land in Argentina recently, or Brazil, because Argentina and Brazil have the world's largest swath of 20-foot topsoil at a depth and width you find in America, I believe, only in Iowa now. And quite wisely, the Brazilians and Argentines said, no, thank you very much, we'll be glad to sell you food, but you can't have our land. 1 million acres was leased in Ethiopia, I thought, for too little money, and you come in with automated farming, and what happens is the small farmers get thrown off the land, and if you're not careful, the land gets overused in a couple of years, the topsoil goes away, and bad things happen. If you've been to Beijing and you've seen a bad air day there, you may or may not know that part of it is because of agriculture. That is, the initial smog in Beijing is from ambient air pollution, that is local air pollution. But that local air pollution, it operates like a giant soccer net, catching billions of soccer balls, which is pollution being blown down from northern China, which used to be a breadbasket. And it was overfarmed, the topsoil was destroyed, and now the wind blowing from north to south carries dust every day down into the soccer net. We don't want that to happen in Africa. That's a valuable resource for the world and critical to Africa's future. Most of these countries cannot absorb people they throw off the land coming to their cities, which don't have enough jobs for the people who live there as it is, never mind the basic public services. So our foundation is now spending more and more time trying to improve the productivity of African agriculture with the small farmers. And I could give you lots of examples, but the most important one to me is our anchor farm experiment in Malawi. We signed a contract with Malawi to help to set up 5 anchor farms, each helping 21,000 farmers. The farmers on average have an acre of land. The anchor farms are 1 to 200 acres. And they're like experiment stations. We bring all the farmers in, we train them in the best tactics, we show them how to line their crop rows with corn husk, for example, if there's been a drought, so that the rain doesn't wash the soil away and the nutrients are retained. We rotate the crops. But the main thing we do is we buy the farmers seed and fertilizer of higher quality at lower cost. And the average African farmer loses half of his or her income because they have no mobile transportation down bad roads for their crops, So they have to pay somebody to take their crops to market, and they lose half their income. That's the going rate. 50% of a person's labor for a year to take the food to market. So if you just take the food to market, you can double incomes. In the first year of our first anchor farm, with lower costs for seed and fertilizer, with much higher yields, more than doubled, and with no cost to take the food to market, and with storage to keep the food healthy while we're waiting for the best price, the average increase for 21,000 farmers was 576%. That's how much their income went up. So when I was there this summer, we're talking people farming an acre of land with a hoe, and usually with one you hold in your hand, not with even a long pole. And there was a woman at the anchor farm who had an acre of land, and she was practicing. She said, she looked at me, she didn't know who I was from, I just some old gray-headed guy that showed up. She heard I was helping. And I said, tell me about what you're doing. She told me. She said, you think you could do it? I said, sure. She said, why do you think that? I said, because I was born on a farm like this. Or I lived on one when I was very young. She said, I don't believe you. So she gave me the hoe, and I planted her row for a while. She said, not bad. He said, maybe that's why we're getting help now. It was very funny. The point I want to make is, this is something I wish you would all think about. It'd be a great mistake for us to throw all these small farmers off the land when we can double, triple, quadruple, quintuple their incomes, clearly double or triple their production, feed Africa, enable them to export without having the terribly disruptive social and economic impacts throwing them off the land it's going to cause. And we can get all our kids in school. So I think that is very important. We also have processing operations in Rwanda that I'm proud of, a coffee roasting facility and a soybean roasting facility, processing facility. And we're doing the same thing in Latin America, by the way. And we pay for the stuff, we own it, but then as soon as the cost is recovered, we're giving it to farmer co-ops. In other words, my goal is to do what we're trying to do with healthcare in Rwanda, to get us out of everything and allow people to stand on their own 2 feet, and in the process, increase the capacity, which is what I think all of our goals should be. It should be empowerment. But one thing I know is that intelligence and effort are evenly distributed throughout the world. And opportunity and organization in the flow of capital aren't. Sometimes technology is really important. Particularly for fishermen, we found that a cell phone can increase income on average 30% just because you know what the fish are selling for 30 miles up and down the coast. There are lots of other things we could talk about. I do believe that there are still some outstanding challenges, including energy and other governance issues, especially natural resource management. I think that there's not been enough work done to try to make Botswana's model of how it handled its diamond wealth and other natural resource wealth a model in other countries. If you look at, you can all leave here today and get on the internet and look and see how much money is in Botswana's Diamond Trust. It also had some other resource money in there. When it came in and when it goes out, you can see who got it, what they're supposed to do with it, and then they'll make a report about whether they did. Not surprisingly, except for South Africa, Botswana has a per capita income more than twice the average of Africa. But there's good news here. We agreed to try to reduce by 1 million people the deaths of children under 5 from waterborne illnesses by the distribution of oral rehydration therapy and zinc, starting in Nigeria. So people said to me, oh, you can't work there. But I can tell you that so far, We have been successful in operating in the north, where Boko Haram, the Islamic Muslim group, is, in the Niger Delta, where there's been so much fighting, as well as in the Lagos region, and those kids are staying alive. If you hire local people and they know you have no political agenda, you have a reasonable chance to succeed. In the years I've been working in Africa, we've had only 2 people killed. And one, I think, was shot by accident in Lesotho. She was a Dutch nurse. The other was a magnificent, also a Dutch citizen, woman who was 8.5 months pregnant, and she and her architect partner were in Nairobi for the birth of their child, and they were in the mall when Al-Shabaab attacked the mall and started killing people indiscriminately. It isn't a risk-free environment, but it's a pretty good safety record if you think about it. I've been out of the White House forever, over 12 years. And you know, we worked there and we worked in all these countries. I think Africa is worth believing in, it's worth committing to, it's worth partnering with. It is an immensely rich and various continent, and we dare not let their topsoil be destroyed. It will affect you in Delaware. We dare not let the ethnic and religious and tribal conflicts overcome the staggering human potential. It will affect the young men and women from this state who join the military to serve our country. And so I ask you to think about all this. One of the most important things that I think President Obama has done, it's this sort of self-serving, I guess to say, but was to enthusiastically embrace this effort that Hillary and Chelsea urged him to make on wildlife preservation, to try to save the elephants. This is about more than saving the elephants, although it's important. We can't keep losing 2/3 of the elephant herds in Africa without doing devastating damage to the culture, the history, the identity, the self-image of the place. Every day there, just like every day here, people get up and don't you find this about yourself? Inside you have a little set of scales, and one side is light and the other side is dark, and the scales are balanced a little different every day. You don't want the scale to get permanently out of whack. Terrible things happen. This is about the character of the continent. And the elephants and the rhinos are the most endangered species right now. So the United States has taken the lead. We've destroyed a lot of ivory, but the Chinese, who have been the biggest buyers of ivory, have also destroyed a lot of ivory recently. And I want to thank that Hillary and I are very grateful that the White House has been so forthright on this. I asked the Chinese president last fall to help us, and so did she, and they seem to be sincere about this. We need help from our friends in Vietnam to stop it. They're big consumers of ivory. But this is something that we can do to help increase their capacity. And I know that there are people in Africa, and I understand some have already been here talking about it, who are making sacrifices. One of the greatest days I spent near the end of my term was in the tiger preserve in western India with a man who literally was beaten within an inch of his life trying to save the lives of the Indian tigers. There are people like that who are now trying to save the elephants in Africa, who want to bring back the rhino population, and we should support them. Last point I want to make. In December, our family flew to South Africa to say our formal goodbyes to Nelson Mandela. He had been ill for a long time, and we really had our last good conversation with him like a year and a half earlier. The 20-year friendship that I enjoyed with him, including the entire term he served as President of South Africa when I was President of the United States, was one of the most important and informative experiences of my life. And when Mandela died, I did some interviews and I said, look, it's really important not to just canonize this man and turn him into a saint. He was a very good president of South Africa. And he was very good because he did the one thing people find so hard to do today. He was inclusive, even when it required a superhuman spirit to do so. Everybody knows, look, everybody knows he brought his jailers to his inauguration. And it was a very profoundly moving personal story because they had treated him with dignity. And he wanted to reciprocate. But far more important in practical terms is he put the leaders of the political parties who put him in prison and killed his co-workers and could have killed him and never been held accountable, he put them in his cabinet. Now, this guy won. I've got a copy of the South African ballot in my presidential library in the apartment where I stay in when I go down there. I look at it all the time. It's the first time that black South Africans had voted in 300 years. And so for people who couldn't read, there was the flag of the party and the picture of the leader. And there was a really clever guy who looked sort of like Mandela, who got himself at the top of the ballot and had the flag of his party with the same colors as the ANC colors. But it didn't work. So there were like 19 candidates. Mandela won almost 63% of the vote against 18 or 19 opponents. And he called me one night to do a little business, and he said, God, they're giving me hell. I said, the Afrikaners? He said, no, my people. I said, how can you do this? They kept you in jail. They shot our friends. Why do you let them in the government? And he said, we just voted for the first time in 300 years. Can we run the banks? Can we run the army? Can we run the police? Is there anything we can do all by ourselves? Maybe someday yes, today no. We have to do this together. And so he set out to do that. And you look at all the places that got in trouble. The Muslim Brotherhood waited for decades for an election to bring them to power in Egypt. What's the first thing they did? Allow the persecution of the Coptic Christians. 10% of the country, 30% of the country's GDP. That's a great economic strategy. I think we'll go whack 30% of the country's GDP. The surge in Iraq worked not just because of the American soldiers, but because Sunni tribal leaders turned against the Al-Qaeda in Iraq. What happened? Soon it was over. The Shiites in control of the government forgot about them until Anwar Pazas was in trouble the other day. And they said, oh, please come back. They need to leave them in the government, in a partnership. What happened when people had legitimate protests in Syria? The president shot them. What happened in Brazil? The president went into the streets and said, you know, you're right. We have too much political corruption. We got real problems. Will you help me solve the problem? Don't bet against Brazil. That was the right decision. That's what Mandela did. And all of you really should be that kind of agent of change. If you're African, it's your continent and it's your country. If you're not, we should be going there on an empowerment mission to work ourselves out of a job so that we'll have partnerships that will endure and so that everybody will be like that lady that was waving that shirt at me. That's really what's at stake in Ukraine today. Some people, including the Russian president, I think of Ukraine as a giant, important piece on a chessboard of international politics. The people underneath get lost. They're going to be on our side or their side. And here are all these brave Ukrainians who, 100 of them got killed in peaceful protests. Then they stormed the presidential palace. They didn't steal a painting. They didn't steal a sculpture. They didn't deface anything. They just wanted people to see how much excess there were. They walked peacefully away. They said, we want to be a bridge. We don't want to hurt anybody from Russia. We don't want to hurt any of our native Russian speakers. We want to be a bridge between East and West. That's what we want. And what they're being told is, we refuse to let you be there. You have to choose. You're going to be on one side or the other. And if you choose the wrong side, we'll try to split you up. This is a crazy way to approach the 21st century. The only thing that works is creative cooperation. And in the end, that's what Mandela understood. Somehow, in 27 years of prison, and being physically and emotionally abused, and never getting to see his kids grow up, having his marriage destroyed, everything happened, he still came out of it understanding that whether we like it or not, we need each other. And we're going to go forward together. The promise of our partnership with Africa is they're just as smart as all of us think we are. They worked harder than most of us do. It is a good thing that you were here. And our goal should be to go forward together. Thank you very much.